to acknowledge the Bedial people that are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and extend the respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Today, we have two speakers with us. Our first speaker is Parisa Zare, who is pursuing her PhD with City Futures. She has a background in urban design, transport planning. She's going to talk to us about applying geo-design in planning for bicycling. Over to you, Parisa.
Hi,
I'll stop presenting and yes.
Okay, I thought that I said hello and you couldn't hear me. So I would like to share my screen to start my presentation. Sorry, it seems that there's an issue.
Are you all right, Parisa? Do you need a hand?
No, it's all right.
Oh, there we go.
yeah, it's good.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah. Okay, I had a class just before. I just finished that. It seems that it's something with things. So hello everyone, I'm Parisa, and today I'm happy to be with you and present some part of my PhD thesis. And I'm going to talk about the planning and designing for bicycling to having an evidence-based approach. I'm a PhD candidate here, and I have a background in urban studies, and I have a Master of Art in Urban Design. My PhD thesis title is Geo-design in planning and designing for bicycling, an evidence-based approach for collaborative bicycling planning that is supervised by Professor Chris Petit, Dr. Simon Leo, and Dr. Ari Goods. So today, more than half of the world population are living in urban areas, and this is expected to be more than 68% by 2015. Bicycling is an alternative mode of transport that gains attention in the recent year because of this population increase, and also because it has a very environmental benefit because it do not produce any emissions or it doesn't need any external energy, and also because of its health benefit because it can decrease the risk factor for chronic diseases, and its economic benefit as a result of all of these issues. Bicycling is a marginalized mode of transport, especially in Australia. Built environment is one of the main elements that can encourage or discourage bicycling. We need to consider this relationship when we are going to plan for bicycling network. And there is a need to have a well-connected network of bicycling specific infrastructure. And this can just accomplish through having a comprehensive planning, regulation, and funding. So I just want to have a brief of research gap that I go through in my PhD thesis. As I said, there is relationship between a built environment and bicyclist behavior. Although there are lots of studies that try to understand the effect of built environment on bicyclist behavior, but how should these studies be used in the practice of planning is an issue. Also, we need to engage people and stakeholders in the planning process. Different parties are involved in the process of planning. We need to have a framework to engage them in the process of planning for bicycling. Now we are in a new data environment of open and crowdsourced data. And for the future of bicycling planning, there can be different future possible and possible and desirable futures. We need to use these evidence-based approaches and using the information and data to evaluate the possible futures and know that what can be the desirable future. Altogether, we need to have integrative approach to face the complexity of this issue. And this just can be accomplished through having a more comprehensive approach that can involve different peoples and have an evidence-based planning. So Geo-design is a framework that we have proposed to have for bicycling planning in this study because we think that it can cover the research gap that we talk about. Geo-design is a framework that is an environmental design for complex issues in large areas that involve the collaboration of different parties and stakeholders, and it needs digital computing and communication technologies. And it depends on feedbacks about implication and effect of design, proposed design scenarios with simulation and modeling and systematic thinking. In this framework, we will use information technologies and to have an efficient collaboration of design professions, people of place, information technologies, and geographic scientists. In this framework, we will need to answer 6 main questions. The first one is that how should the study area be described? How can it be described? How does the study area operate? Is that working well? How might the study area be changed? And what are the differences that these change may cause? And how should the study area be changed finally? And what is our decision for that? Each of these questions is answered by each of these models that are representation, process, evaluation, change, impact, and decision models. So this is the framework of the geo-design that we consider for this study. The aim of geo-design is always negotiation. So we are not picking one design, but we are combining different ideas. We are going to understand the history of a place, evaluate the current situation, and propose different scenarios and evaluate those scenarios and have the negotiation between different parties to propose the final design for the future. So Geo-design tool is an innovative way to have the potential to integrate technology and the process of decision making in the planning and designing. This shows how Geo-design process develop. It starts with the concept and guiding principles, and after digitizing and using modeling and negotiation, we are going to have the final design. Based on this concept, we had proposed to have a co-design workshop during my study. So the aim of the co-design workshop was collaboration between different stakeholders, and we had this workshop at different stages of the study. The first one was the focus group workshop for understanding the current bicycling planning in the case study, of what is the needs and aims and the components of planning for bicycling. We had participants from Road and Maritime Services, Greater Sydney Commission, Penrith, Waverley, Liverpool, and City of City Council, and also Transport NSW. We had also the first Geo-design workshop to use and test the developed tools and methods in the practice of Geo-design. We had participants from master students in the Geo-design course and also the Penrith Council. And we will have the last workshop in the next 12 months to use the method in practice with Wollongong and Penrith Council. I just want to have an overview of the Geo-design workshop to show you how it goes and what were the tools and the result of this workshop. So it was held in 2 consecutive weeks in 4 days in City Analytics Labs. We had online and in-person students. 30 students was in person and 19 was online. So we had used different platforms to enable this collaboration with online and in-person students. And we use actually Moodle and Blackboard. It's a teaching platform in UNSW. And we have divided the student into 5 main groups. And yeah, the process of the geo-design start with understanding the current situation. What is the context of the study? What is the current planning process? And after discussion groups, students had the evaluation models and evaluate the current situation to see that is that working well based on the propensity to cycle, cycling infrastructure, accessibility by cycle. These are evaluative maps that we showed the student, and they were interactive maps that go through the discussion sessions to have this evaluation. After that, we defined some systems that we thought that it is important in the issue. It was based on the safety, end of trip facility, green spaces and landscaping, shared bike and cycling pathway. And at this stage, students start to make some policies to propose the required policies for the study area. And after having discussion, we had 4 design scenarios that are change models: commuting by bicycling, recreational bicycling, cycling to school, and cycling to high street and shops. And after with having discussion with Penric Council and evaluating the effect of the change models with ABM simulation, we had the final proposed plan. So this is the whole process of geo-design we had last year. This is some of the result of the geo-design. We use different platforms, as I mentioned in this workshop. For example, we use Pool Everywhere to keep the student engaging in the process and evaluating their experience. We also have the Google Map to have a collaborative map making. And this is the result of the design scenario part 1. You can see that all of the students could draw and could design together. It doesn't have any limitation. And also we had some pre-workshop assessment for understanding what is their opinion about different provisions for planning for bicycling network. And also we had some post-workshop questionnaire to evaluate the students' experience from the workshop. The method that we used for evaluating the design scenario was agent-based modeling. Agent-based modeling is a method for examining system of individual agents based on their observed behavior in the real world. Basically, in ABM systems, agents have specific attributes and there is a set of rules between them that drive their actions. Agents have some common attributes that are autonomy. They can have independent decision. They are heterogeneous. They can exist in groups, and they are active. It means that they can have independent effect on the simulation. We defined 4 main agents for this modeling that are cyclists, road, origin, and destinations. Cyclists start their moving from origin to destination from on the graph of their roads. We have defined attributes for each of these agents. For example, for cyclists, we have defined number of cyclists, their speed and objective. For road, what is the cycling infrastructure in the road? What is the length, slope, and tree canopy? We had to use open data sources for defining these characteristics. I would like to show you this video that shows the movement of cycling from their origin to the red point, that is the St. Mary station. This is part of the area that we consider for the geo-design workshop. So you can see that you can select the destination that we are going to ask cyclists to go to. So here we had selected transport interchange, that is the train station. We can define the number of cyclist agents. We define it like 100 agent, and then the route selection algorithm that can be shortest path or based on the slope. And also we can set that what is the weight of each on route selection algorithm. For example, the cycling infrastructure is more important or slope is more important, because it depends on the each area that how we are going to say that some areas are flat, so we don't need the slope to have the highest weight. This map shows a number of the agents that has passed through each road segment. We are going to calculate the number of the agents in the road segments, and we can use this as a supporting evidence for decision makers that see that if we are going to have this design scenario, what would be the most used roads that they can put the infrastructure on that road. So based on the current result that I have get, the geo-design approach can fit into the bicycling planning because it enables the collaboration of different organizations, and also it enables the public participation in the process. We can have an evidence-based evaluation of the design scenarios, and it means that we can approximately see some of the gaps of the research in bicycling planning that we currently have. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Parisa. So we have like another 10 minutes for questions and discussion. I would like to invite questions. Either you can type in on the chat or unmute yourself and go for it. So I'll start with mine. So towards the end of the presentation, you mentioned about how geo-design in cycling in terms of public participation. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on like how significant or how useful it will be for public participation aspect of it?
So in the geo-design process, the main idea is that we need to have the collaboration between design professions, people of the places, geographic scientists, and also information technologists. People of the place, it means that in the workshop we are going to see that we are going to invite some of the peoples that are actually cyclists, or from the cyclist groups, their head of the cyclist group, something like that, and we are going to invite them in the process. And also we can have some surveys prior to the geo-design workshop. That we show them what is the perception of the bicyclists from the a bike plan, what they want, what they need, and we can involve them in the process in this way too. So yes, we can have public participation prior the workshop, prior the design workshops, and during the workshop with engaging some of the bicycling group in the process. And also after the workshop to have this more communication with them. I think someone has a question.
Yeah. This question from Nem about like the program language used for the ABM.
So I use the Gamma software. Sorry, I forgot to mention that it was the interface of the Gamma. So it has its own language, as Chris mentioned. It is a kind of easy to follow. That you will define a GIS layer in that, and you define different species for that based on the idea of the modeling that you want. For example, if you want to simulate the transportation model, I had just defined 4 species. That was road, bicyclist, origin, and destination. And yeah, it was the Gamma software.
Yeah, and Alessandra.
Hey, Parisa, that was a great presentation. Thank you. I have a question. It's more specific. I worked on a study last year that looked at how women use cycling routes specifically. And you mentioned just before that you're going to be looking at talking to, the head of cycling groups and stuff like that. Are you going to try and capture like different aspects of cyclists, or because I know a lot of women tend to use like footpaths and things like that rather than the road. Yeah, just like, how are you going to try and capture those different cyclists essentially?
One of the things that we have is that we have lots of data. I had a talk, for example, with Fiona in City of Sydney, Fiona Campbell. And I figured out that there's lots of data. They have surveys, they have different questionnaires from the people, even from different ages and different genders. So they have the data, but it's not completely involved in the process of planning. With this concept, we are going to see different aspects of the planning and consider that in the process. So it's right. We need one of the, if you evaluate the data, you can see that approximately most of the cyclists are the male young cyclists, based on the Strava data, for example. So we need to engage the woman in the plans. Yeah, it's an opportunity that we can have also women engaged in the planning process. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I have one more. In terms of, since we are since me I'm managing the lab with Chris, and so we have been looking at like the smart places which enables collaboration and all. So how significant do you think like having a facility like the City Analytics Lab is to the or how important it is to the Geo-design process? And have there been examples like where things have been done very well? Or...
Yeah, we had the Geo-design workshop in the City Analytics Labs, and with all new updated equipment. Actually, it works very well because we could have all the online students on the screens, and they collaborate with the in-person students. And we had also the biggest screens for collaboration in groups. So we had 6 systems, I think, in the lab. And each of the group was working on all each of them, and it works very well actually, because it's enabled their collaboration, their discussion, and having online students from China. We had lots of students from China, so we had a very, very great collaboration based on the equipment that we had in the City Analytics Lab.
Is there anything that didn't work well? In case if you have to do the lab again, like what should we do better?
It doesn't work well. So sometimes they're working with, I don't remember the name of the software that we use to send files to other systems. It doesn't work. What was that?
Cruiser, I think.
Yeah, Cruiser. So sometimes it doesn't work properly with softwares and with other data, it doesn't it's not very user friendly. And also I think there was another that was working with a PC, and also it was a combination of the system. It was PC and it was laptop and Cruiser, so one of them was not working properly. I think it was Cruiser and laptop. So yeah, I just faced these 2 issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So Sean has a question.
Sean.
Hi Parisa, great presentation. Thanks. What is the area what area is the location shown on the screen? Does it have much existing cycling infrastructure?
So the area that we were working on was part of the Penrith Council. It was the area around the St. Mary station. And it was actually for SA1. It was in a small area. And it has just, if you have my screen, I think just this road had bicycling, some bicycling, shared bike a space for bicycling. Yeah, it was, I did not bring any further information for this case, but yeah, it was just here, and it was limited cycling infrastructure. And there was another thing that students have, was that they evaluate what will be the cost of their design process. For example, we said that you will have a budget of 50 million, and you need to consider that they could measure. For example, they measure this is the bicycling path, and this is the cost of this path, and so they measure their design, proposed design cost. Yes, Chris.
Hi, Parisa, great presentation. Just wondering if you could comment a little bit about, you had a couple of the people from the council there at your workshop about, I guess, that the use of the tool and the data and the insights to potentially help them plan for around this precinct.
Yeah, so we had invited people who are engaged in bicycling planning from Penrith Council, and they had a discussion with the students, and also they said that, for example, this area cannot be a good place for this kind of cycling infrastructure, or that area needs something else. They get a great insight to students to what is the need of the area. And it doesn't take a lot of time from them. I think it was just 2 hours, 2 meetings. One was for understanding the current situation, and one was when the student was trying to finalize their design and decide what design scenario is better. So we engaged them at 2 stages, and it was a very great collaboration. Because it makes everything clear for students, and also they were engaged in the process of designing for the final design. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
No,
Thank you very much, Parisa. That was a very interesting presentation, and I've already seen this like with our meeting earlier, and like it's always like impressive the work that's been done through the City Analytics Lab. Thank you very much.
thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And our second speaker is Nemanja Nikolic. Nem is a spatial data scientist who's pursuing his MPhil with City Futures. And his research areas are urban dynamics, property market, and network analysis. And he's going to talk about commercial geography of Sydney in terms of submarkets in offices. Over to you, Nem.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Bala. Yes, so yeah, my name is Nemanja Nikolic, or in short, you can just call me Nem. So I'll be just getting my presentation on the screen. Cool. Can you see the screen? I always get confused when I'm doing presentations how to go to full screen on these ones. Here we go.
Yeah.
Do you see my full screen?
No, it was earlier. It was good, but now we are seeing the present of.
Okay, let me try one more time. If not, I'll just share the PowerPoint directly. PowerPoint full screen. Do you see the full screen now?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So as Bala said, we'll be going through the topic of office submarkets, or more broadly, the commercial geographies. A few concepts will be used interchangeably here in terms of office submarkets and or office clusters. So we'll get into that a bit further. So quickly on myself, yeah, in terms of my academic career, at the moment I'm doing an MPhil at the City Futures Research Centre as part of the Value Australia project. Also occasional casual academic at one of the courses of the City of Master Analytics. And my background is in spatial planning. In terms of my professional experience, I've got around 5 years experience in consulting, government and the NGO sector, and again, working a lot of spatial analysis in GIS and urban planning economics and human geography, and some of the places I worked down there, if you are familiar with those. So what I'll be covering today is a little bit about the background and the research objectives and the conceptual framework / methodology. But what I really want to focus in is on the outputs. There is a lot of them, so I'm not sure if I'll manage to do it all now. We might just race through a few slides if we run out of time. But they'll all have a similar kind of layout in terms of the outputs. You know, that we'll talk around analysis and the modeling, and then the conclusions and insights. So when it comes to the background of the topic and the research objectives, the one thing that comes out constantly in the literature is, do submarkets exist? And most papers and most studies are within the kind of neoclassical economics branch and school of thought, and they're observing it, you know, from a highly kind of economic economic perspective, really. So, you know, the assumptions that there is this perfect market, and it, you know, has a number of assumptions related to it, and due to market imperfections, such as, you know, like limited information or heterogeneous products, so slightly different product types, a few market imperfections arise that give existence to submarkets. So I won't go too much into it. It's abstract, but in general, there's two things that pop up, and that's substitution and the rule of one price. So those are the two main concepts in relation to submarkets. And substitution, that purely means that two things are alike, so two houses are traded as within the same submarket, or, you know, two apartments or something like that, and that the rule of one price is applicable to them. That means that the unit price of a bedroom is the same across those. You can imagine different submarkets. So your submarkets of you know, a broader market is a market for cars, and then within that you have electric cars, or cars that are, you know, work on diesel, or SUVs. So those are simple examples of submarkets. And we have other similar concepts across other areas, such as industry, office clusters, and then functional regions within urban geography and label economics. And within this research, they will be kind of used. I won't have a very tight definition, but we'll be incorporating some of these other elements from other studies. So one thing that also comes through literature is that there's a major focus on identifying submarkets and using structural components. By structural, I mean, you know, what is the age of the building? How many bedrooms does it have? So those would be kind of the supply elements if you observe it from an economic point of view. And also there's a substantially smaller literature base for commercial property due to data limitations and a reduced number of transactions that occur in that market. And more broadly, there's a lack of understanding of the dimensionality of, you know, if you put these submarkets in an urban context, you know, what scale, spatial scale do certain processes occur at, time periods. So in general, there's not so much understanding on that. A lot of the studies are purely at one point in time. And also, as I said, there's most of them focused on the supply side attributes, and there's limited knowledge on demand aspects. So when it comes to the research objectives, there's a lot on the screen at the moment, but if you focus just on what's underlined, it's really around defining and differentiating demand-driven commercial office property submarkets. And to achieve that, we're using, I'll be identifying and classifying certain processes and patterns. And those processes and patterns will tell me, again, how those submarkets are different from each other. What's unique to each submarket? Are there any patterns there, any processes? And importantly, it will be done at the intra-urban kind of meso level. So a lot of the previous studies have been done at a micro level or macro, but there's a little knowledge on that kind of mid-ground, and accounting for spatial scale, which is, again, I'm really emphasizing that because there hasn't been much on that. And if you want to put it in a form of a question, what classes of office clusters exist? What are the main factors that shape those same office clusters / submarkets? And how can novel modeling techniques be used to achieve that? So briefly on the conceptual framework, as I said, it's not going to be it's not just a economic point of view, it's also incorporating urban geography, urban study, housing study. So it's an overlap area where I'm trying to situate some markets in a broader context. So understanding, putting it into a kind of a system, really. So one of the premises of urban geography is that it's a study of the city as a system, where we have different factors and processes and outcomes and different scales. So it's alive, it's more dynamic. And as I said, the level that we're focusing on is the intra-urban geography. And if we look at it at a more graphical perspective, we can, if you look at the top area of this, the top half of the graph, you can see some of those examples of processes that occur across time. So we got things like decentralization, globalization, or the COVID pandemic. And obviously those processes impact different areas and submarkets simultaneously. And at the same time, when we go lower into more deeper into the macro, meso, and micro level, we start seeing different patterns and different factors that impact those areas and differentiate them. For instance, labor accessibility is an important factor that differentiates different submarkets from each other. Or at a more local micro level, it might be local amenity. So I heard something in the background. Was that a question or something?
It was someone joining.
Okay. So in terms of the methodology, building on the previous graph, again, a lot on the screen, but you just need to focus on the top three boxes. So there's three phases in getting to understanding submarkets, and that's one, first we need to identify them. Two, we need to actually understand how they're different, profile them. And three is incorporate that element of scaling, which I've been talking about, and dynamics in general. And in order to achieve that, if you look onto the right-hand side where it's more graphical, there's two major components. One is land use zoning. Two is occupations. So as I said, this is a demand-driven approach to understanding and modeling submarkets. And one thing that we have a gap in here in Australia at the moment is that we don't have a data set that tells us what buildings are commercial, what buildings are residential. So we have to kind of use some sort of proxy, and I'm using land use as a proxy for that, and then layering on top different occupations, and trying to find out if there is a relationship. So for instance, do professional jobs occur in commercial zones, or do laborers work in industrial zones? And then using those occupations to find clusters across the city and essentially get the different categories of submarkets or centres around Sydney. So like a CBD or a suburban centre, or something like Macquarie Park, which is a business park. So going on to the phase one, which is identifying submarkets, as I said, it's a demand-driven approach. So we have a lot of occupations based on census, and we're trying to find out if there is a relationship between occupations and specific built forms and locations. So there are other approaches to identifying submarkets, and there's a lot of literature on this. On the supply side, there's, if you look at, as I said, structural components and the building typologies or the locational attributes. So there's a lot of different ways you can cut it, but there is the notion that using demand side attributes is a kind of a shortcut to quickly identify submarkets. And as I said, this is a kind of a heuristic approach where a lot of analysis is trying to be done. So certain shortcuts need to be taken. I'm not saying that the demand aspect is inferior to the supply side element. So we have 3 major steps in this phase, and that's first categorizing the different zones, predominant use. So, we'll see this on the next slide. I'll explain this further. And then again, the occupations, as we said, is the relationship with officers, and lastly, identifying those occupational clusters that are used as a proxy to of submarkets. And to achieve this, a principal component analysis is used initially, and then various clustering algorithms to find that. And there's certain gaps in terms of how it's done outside of this research paper. And previously, a lot of this stuff it's only kind of anecdotally known that certain occupations occur in certain land uses or spaces. So people assume that happens, but they don't have a data-driven approach to actually find that. Or identifying clusters, a lot of the time it's done by eyeballing a map. So a lot of this is trying to give it a more kind of empirical foundation. So yes, as I said, as you see on the left corner, there's a number of zones that are employment based. So a lot of employment occurs in them, and they've been categorized to match different types of built forms. So for instance, the B7, which is a business park, or B3, which is a commercial core, they are predominantly allow for office users. If you look at the legislation, or for instance, the red bits, the health and education. So there's different zones in Sydney, such as the special precinct zones that are particularly prescribed that only educational and health users can occur there. So it's really trying to mimic the broad 4 or 5 categories of property sectors. And as I said, we don't have a data set that gives us the answer to that. So we're using the zoning and the legislation to kind of create a proxy for that. And there is certain issues here, in terms of certain destination zones where that's the lowest geography you can get the data, where there are more than one zone. So those are excluded, and only homogeneous really areas are maintained for the principal component analysis. And if we look at the principal component analysis, what it does is it pretty much is used for 2 things. One is clustering, and 2 is dimensionality reduction. And in this case, if you look at the biplot on the right-hand side, all those little blue dots are those identified zones from the previous step. And what we're doing is we're layering on top all the different occupations, and we're seeing if there's a relationship amongst those 2 components. So you can see, for instance, there's professional occupation managers, which are the axes, the loading, on the biplot loadings that have most of the variation. So they capture most of the variation on the first principal component, and on the second one, you can see a lot of industrial jobs, such as laborers, machine operators, and technicians and trades. So it's already showing us clustering and grouping of different occupation in different areas. That's what we want to really find using this method. And if we zoom into the area along the professionals occupation, you'll see that a lot of the areas are commercial zones. So North Sydney, Lavender Bay, North Ryde, and then also some mixed-use zones such as Surrey Hills, Homebush, Bay, Silverwater. So this is telling us that along that professional occupation, there's a lot of these commercial areas where there are clustered within, and there's obviously a clear relationship there. So we're not assuming that professional occupations occur in offices. We actually see it in the data. And what's also interesting here is if we go back one step and look on the right-hand side, this kind of the vertical axis saying managers, and on the left-hand side, we see also community and professional workers and sales workers. We see that within these areas, there's also kind of a second tier classification where the areas on the right have more managerial occupations, such as Frenchs Forest and Belrose, and the areas on the left have some additional number of jobs in retail. So it's really good to not only finding along if there is clustering, but also how these areas are different from each other. So as I said, yeah, there's a clear link in the data between occupations and land use zones. And previously that's only been done anecdotally in this instance. People assume that. And we'll also get the first high-level identification of the nature of different submarkets, as we've seen with Frenchs Forest and Piedmont, for instance. There is certain issues, but as I mentioned, and you can go further in terms of the occupation. So here I'm only using 1- and 2-digit codes for the occupations, but you can go further down to 3- and 4-digit. So I'm conscious we don't have too much time. What I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'll cover this next step of the actual using the algorithms to spatially identify the different office clusters and submarkets, and then I'll also try to cover one other brief aspect. But so with the previous stage, we've really identified that there is a clear link between professional occupations and commercial zones. And as we said, the legislation is pretty clear in saying that the commercial zones allow predominantly offices to be built within them. So now what we're using that the occupations to actually spatially locate where those areas are. And there's a few different algorithms that have been used for this. First, more statistically driven ones such as hotspot analysis and cluster outlier analysis. And what they do show us is where is the significant clustering around Sydney. So you can see, the CBD, North Sydney, Macquarie Park, Parramatta, and that the clustering is strongest at around a bit over 1.5 kilometres in radius. But this isn't sufficient to really identify all the little areas around the city. So in the next step, we're actually using density-based clustering algorithms such as DB-scan, HDB-scan, and optics to identify those areas. And what in this case, optics was used as the best one. But what is really good about it is that it allows you to identify areas of varying densities. So you'll identify the Sydney CBD and split it up into various subcomponents based on its own density, and then do the same for something that's more like a business park, in Macquarie Park or Balcombe Hills. So it's not using only a single density, but it can be used with varying densities. And what we get here is a much clearer picture. So we identify areas around the CBD, Piedmont, Surrey Hills, if you're familiar with Sydney, North Sydney, Chatswood, Parramatta, Liverpool, etc., etc. Colours here are used randomly. They don't represent anything specific, just different clusters of offices and submarkets. You have Randwick there as well, and Bondi Junction. And obviously, some of these occupations, some of these professional jobs occur at uni campuses, and other occur in skyscrapers and in the CBD, and etc. But what we're really interested here is the ones that occur in kind of office spaces that can be leased and purchased. So it's not so much around the health and education precincts, but more around those traditional employment centres. And as I said, you can see how on this graph how the densities vary between so on the left-hand side, you can get the CBD, which is quite dense. And then as you've moved further away from it, the densities also change. And yeah, the contributions, this is the first time I think I've seen optics being used for this. Usually it's K-means or something else, but not optics. And as I said, yeah, it gives us a really good understanding of how the densities of the clusters vary. And I'll briefly just show you the most recent outputs that I got in terms of the differentiation between the different submarkets. So we've identified them spatially, and we know where they are, and we're based on the professional occupations. But as I said in that one of the previous steps, well, what are the other secondary differences that exist amongst them? And to achieve that, there's a number of different variables that have been used, mainly business and employment characteristics, because this is a demand-driven approach, to give us a more intricate typology of the submarkets. And again, there are other approaches, like size and density, or a large center, a small center, administrative functions. An area can be, for instance, a strategic center, or urban morphology, what we've been talking, like suburban center. But again, here we're focusing on demand-driven approach. And I'll skip this one and just show you the outputs, which are interesting. So as I said, there's things like business size, business turnover, private and public sector jobs, occupation mix, industry mix. And if we look at how that looks on a map, and actually what the algorithm gives us is, in this case, I've told it to find 3 clusters based on the elbow method, but pretty much what it's telling us is, if you look at the red line, it kind of peaks at different spots. The same goes with the blue and the green. And if we go to the next slide, which is spatially representing what we found in this previous one, we get a differentiation of the blue centers, which have a higher number of professionals, occupations and IT industries, and a mixed sector, versus areas that are green, such as Sydney Olympic Park, Rhodes, North Ryde. They have a lot more managers and administration, admin industry, with a lot of private sector jobs. And lastly, with red colour, so areas such as Liverpool, Parramatta, Cogra, they have a lot of administrative workers that work in the public sector. And amongst all of the different variables that were used, so business size, turnover, et cetera, the ones that give the highest explanatory power are occupational type and employment sector. So I might stop there. We ran out of time, but there is additional stuff that's been done in the meantime. But yeah, I'm becoming conscious that's probably a bit too much with the time I have. So I might end it there and just hand it over for any questions.
Thank you very much, Nem. Very interesting presentation. I'll open the floor for questions. Let me start with one. So how do you think this submarket analysis and outputs are going to be valuable, important for valuation of properties, like for commercial properties, like if you can elaborate on that?
Yeah. So one of the slides that unfortunately didn't have time to cover was actually looking at other measures such as accessibility and center characteristics to understand if there are differences there. But pretty much the notion behind using this approach and improving land valuation is that you're finding distinct groups of homogeneous areas and that have similar characteristics, and where an additional where accessibility is valued in the same way. So if you didn't have this approach, if you grouped it all into like one big conglomerate and just ran some automated evaluation models or whatever techniques you have in mind, the problem would be that there would be too much difference in the data and in these groups, and it would compromise the results of the valuation method. So this way, you're really finding different groups that are similar, and you're minimizing the variation of the data, right? And hence improving the quality of your outputs. Because if you have something as the CBD and a business park in the same group, they'll have quite different behaviors and corrupt pretty much the analysis. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. Any other questions? Yeah, so we have one. Over to you. Over to you, Rupa.
Hi, Nemanja. Thank you for your interesting presentation. I had 2 questions.
Yep.
Firstly, in your discussion or in your analysis, how will you be factoring in sort of structural changes in employment by professions? Because there's a global trend of, casualization of workforce in specific sectors, although, precarious employment, contract casual employment, that as well as COVID is sort of restructuring, employment trends by industry categories and subsectors as well. That's my first question. The second is, are you going to validate your modelling and analysis by discussing your results and your methodology with some of the commercial valuers in government and commercial property sector?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the second question, I think that's popped out numerous times across my conversations, and it's a really, really valid one. So far, I've been that person validating it. Like I have worked, as I said, 5 years in the profession, so I'm familiar. But you're right. Like I think there is an ambition to do that. It's just like how much time I'll have. But we're also looking into getting some additional data from Collier, the ones of Collier's, JLL, Savills that do some sort of similar analysis, but probably not so much data driven. So I think that would also give us some insights whether the submarkets we've identified are good. And from just looking at CBRE data and the number of submarkets that they have, there's probably a 90% match between what I've found with my research and what they have in their reports.
Yeah.
It does require a more in-depth discussion, that's for sure. So short answer, if I have time, yes. And the first question, I guess, structural changes to employment. Yeah, I mean, like, as you said, casualization, working from home, those are all really, really big questions. I think, in this study, it's not so much around the structural changes of employment. Like I have done a brief analysis, a temporal analysis of the change of the clustering of professional jobs. So, comparing back in 2011 and 2006 or 1991. So as far as the journey to work data goes, has there been a change in the density and clustering of the professional jobs? And what's that? It gives you outputs that are quite interesting. That, for instance, you could pick up Darling Harbour that was built at one stage and had like a large influx of jobs at that point to that area. But yeah, at the moment, I think it's a bit out of scope when it comes to the structural changes in terms of part-time, full-time. The one thing I might include is it might be a variable in the differentiation of submarkets. So like an area might have more full-time employees than it has part-time employees, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Just going back to your first point, I would suggest that you also touch base with the Australian Property Institute, the professional association that represents valuers, because you could go and present your findings to them as well, and they can invite their valuer members along to get the feedback?
Yeah, that's a good idea. And that in literature that constantly comes across is, the importance of expert delineated boundaries and submarkets. So it's a very valid point.
Great stuff. Any other questions? I think like we are right on time. So if you have one more, we can take one more question, or we can conclude our meeting. Okay, so thank you everyone. There's been like so we had to like move everything to online, fully online this time. And thanks everyone for coming. And so provided the next seminar will be by Professor Stuart Barr from Melbourne. And we're still not sure like how things are going to go. So it would be, we are looking at keeping it hybrid for now, and depending on how things are, like in a week, we'll reevaluate, and if needed, it will be moved online. So that being said, yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming, and hoping to see you again in next seminar series.